Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And it's Alex in the studio.
It's Joe Pike, also in the studio.
And welcome back, Luke Tryl, the Executive Director of More in Common. Hello, Luke.
Hi, it's great to be here.
What sort of research have you been doing into people's opinions this week? Because that's what More in Common does.
I've been up in Scotland speaking to people on the West Coast and in Glasgow about what they think of the upcoming Holyrood elections.
Okay, and have you done anything a bit more left field? Because I know you sometimes test people's opinions on unexpected things.
Yeah, well, obviously, most important event of the week is Pancake Day.
Right.
And we looked at the growing age divide when it comes to pancake toppings. So amongst older generations, lemon and sugar remains the firm favourite. But amongst Gen Z, who, and I think I'm allowed to say it about this sort of polling, are often wrong on these issues. I'll question my impartiality for a little bit. They prefer Nutella. As their spread. So we're becoming a nation of Nutella pancakes rather than lemon and sugar.
Well, that puts me firmly in the old age.
Yes. Okay. Also, another date of note this week, it was Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's 66th birthday on Thursday. But the morning started for him with him being arrested by Thames Valley Police, who are investigating these claims of misconduct in public office. Joe, it's a kind of a police story now. But is it still a bit of a politics story as well?
A bit, I think. It's clearly a breathtaking moment. I think those in Parliament who'd been putting pressure on the government and maybe the monarchy to take more action, some talk that Andrew could be removed from the line of succession. I think all those people are now stepping back. Everyone in Parliament realises that if there is a legal process underway, an investigation underway, they want to step back. And if there were next steps, what seems odd is that they all sort of linked to the king, right? I mean, if there was to be some evidence that the police wanted to put forward, the Crown prosecution would deal with it. If there was to be a court case, it would be Rex versus potentially Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. And then if there was to be a prison spell, he would serve at His Majesty's pleasure. I mean, that is just such a sort of odd juxtaposition, isn't it, really?
And Alex, me and Laura recorded an episode of Newscast earlier in the day, which you can listen to if you scan the QR code now. And we got some analysis from Dominic Casciani, our Home and Legal Affairs expert, on what misconduct in public office is in the law. But what I was struck by when we were doing that episode was reading the statement from the King. And it was the sort of statement we're used to hearing from politicians when something controversial or important happens, not the sort of statement you're used to reading from the monarch. We were reading it and reading between the lines and like it was a political story.
Yeah, and I think that's because, obviously, the role of the royal family and the king in the way that they've responded and handled all of this, because you've got to remember, the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was clearly an extraordinary moment, even though the police process will carry on in the very ordinary way from this point on. Andrew, as we know, has said that he hasn't done anything wrong. Everything will unfold through the judicial process now. But this has been going on for so much longer than that. And, you know, there have been these recent interventions from the king, which has taken a bit of a different tone. So the first significant one was when he stripped his brother of his titles, of course. And then there was the moving him out of Royal Lodge. And then we had a recognition last week while Prince William was on a trip in Saudi Arabia. You had that statement from the palace, which was talking about the victims and all of that. And now, today, you've had almost another kind of response from the king where he named Andrew, his brother, and it was very directly about the situation that was unfolding. And you have to think that it's almost an acknowledgement that they have to respond in a way that you don't and haven't had from the royal family for many, many years. You know, that old adage of the Queen, which was, you know, never complain, never explain, doesn't wash anymore given the magnitude of the moment and the fact it is so directly linked to the king. This is his brother. It's a key member of the royal family who's been arrested now. And I think it just, when you read the tone and content, it was very careful, but it was very much acknowledging that this is something that they can't ignore at this point.
And Joe, we learnt today during the course of Thursday that the Home Office were told in advance by Thames Valley Police that this is what they were going to do, but Buckingham Palace wasn't.
Yeah, and it's also in the Home Office telling me that this is normal, that Shabana Mahmood was tipped off shortly before that arrest. Number 10, we've asked the same question. Did they have advance notice? They haven't responded and say they would never normally comment on this sort of issue. I think there is a sort of a tension and unease always within Number 10 about dealing with the royal family. That has slightly shifted in recent weeks because of the drip allegations, because the fact of the Lord Mandelson appointment means that Keir Starmer can't be detached, but also because he has faced claims of a boys' club in his own team of misogyny, and therefore the Prime Minister certainly wants to be looking to not be standing in the way of any action. And on the topic of the line of succession, as I say, some talk that Andrew could be removed from that. It can happen via legislation, quite simply. The only rub is every single Commonwealth realm needs to be consulted. That could be a long process, and also pretty embarrassing. Maybe prompt some of those realms to think, if we're approving this, like, actually, why are we part of this institution at all? Andrew
has always denied the claims that were put to him related to Jeffrey Epstein, but it seems that what the Thames Valley Police are investigating this time, because of the name of the allegation that they've given it, misconduct in public office, it appears this is related to a kind of much earlier time than people have been talking about up till now, which is when he was the so-called trade envoy for the UK government, which is 2001 to 11.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was quite a long time ago, but it was for quite a long period as well, and obviously went over successive governments, two different governments of two different parties, if you like. And that role is a role, I think I'm right in saying he was officially appointed to it by the then Queen, even though it was a sort of role where he was out there doing work for the government, where he was championing the UK on the world stage and sort of banging the drum for UK trade and all the rest of it. And obviously we knew that Thames Valley Police was considering some information about whether or not there had been a breach or misconduct in public office relating to his time in that role. And then the arrest is on, because it is directly in relation to that. And then we'll see how that unfolds. But I think, I listened to the episode that you recorded earlier of Newscast, and Dom Casciani talks a lot there about the complexities, of that specific allegation, and
lots of tests,
how you prove it and don't prove it, and all of the complications around it. But I think it's also this sort of question about how there's always attempted to be this sort of separation between the parliamentary and the parliament and the government is tried to act very sensitively in relation to the royal family, and lots of parliamentarians and MPs have tiptoed so cautiously around what they say about the royals, and there are even conventions and kind of rules in the House of Commons about what you can and can't say regarding the royals. And at the same time, you have Prince Andrew doing this public role, which is, it sort of crosses over a little bit. And I just wonder, of course, the official legal process goes on, but the questions around all of that, I wonder if at some point they will surface too. Where's the scrutiny, the accountability, the transparency? Did it apply to Prince Andrew in that role in the same way it would to somebody who'd been directly appointed by the government as a minister in that situation?
So long, hasn't it?
It's taken so long to get to this point. And, there are some people that might say hindsight is a wonderful thing, and you can always look back over what could or should or shouldn't have been done after new information emerges. But I do think that given, as I said, the magnitude of what has happened now, there will almost be inevitably questions about the role of people and the institutions of this country and how things reached this point.
And look, the police have warned people, because there's an active investigation, to not just go onto social media and mouth off with their opinions about what they think about might or might not have gone on. But what's a way of looking at how the public feel about the royal family in the light of all the claims and revelations there have been?
Yeah, this is a really sort of perilous time for the royal family in public opinion terms. So we know, we remain a nation of monarchists. By about 2 to 1, people support having a monarchy over a republic, although support is lower amongst younger generations. But even amongst those who back the royal family, when we asked at the end of last year, they think the king was too slow when it came to dealing with Andrew, and in particular removing his titles. They think the royal family, took too long to get round to dealing with him. But I also think there's, speaking to people in focus groups over, I guess, past nearly 3 weeks now, about the Epstein and the Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor revelations. I think we're at another one of those kind of epoch-defining moments like the expenses scandal, because when you speak to people, it has really reinforced and crystallised in their view this sense of a rigged system, that there's one rule for elites, that elites all look after one another.
Oh, and that's why you say epoch defining, because it's not defining for the royal family or defining for the government or for Keir Starmer. You say it's everybody involved in national life.
Exactly, and even with the Mandelson piece, yes, I mean I've had lots of people saying how angry they are at the Prime Minister for ever appointing him, but they all say it goes beyond that. It's about politics and institutions, and of course, we're at a time where, leave aside all the scandal, just on the basics of government to deliver, whether it's on cost of living, public services, people are frustrated and think things aren't working, and that's driving them away from the traditional mainstream. I think this could be something that turbo charges that pull away from mainstream, benefiting non-mainstream or new emergent political parties. But I think Alex is absolutely right. The public aren't going to wash with business as usual. They're going to want to see something different, something change as a result of this, like they did after expenses.
And what's also, just on that point, what's so interesting is that you're already getting this sort of narrative come from the US. In light of the arrest of Andrew, it has been sort of accelerated that although while in the UK people might be being frustrated at the pace it's taken, the time it's taken to get to the point that he was stripped of his titles or whatever else, in the US, where Epstein, of course, was based and a lot of his networks were based, there hasn't, apart from Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, been anybody else who has been, gone through any kind of judicial process there. So there is also that kind of contrast between what's happened in the UK and the US, which probably feeds into...
Although the Clintons are going to be giving testimony to Congress fairly soon, although
yes.
At the moment that's going to be behind closed doors, so it won't feel like a big accountability moment.
That will be a big moment, I agree. 2 dates. 1999... when we think Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, as he now is, met Jeffrey Epstein. 2010 was the photo of the then Prince and Jeffrey Epstein in Central Park when their relationship supposedly ended. So the relationship supposedly ended 16 years ago and started, 27 years ago? It just, the stretches of time.
Yeah, and the other date
vast.
to add into that was 2019, was of course the former then Prince Andrew's interview with Emily Maitlis. And you think at that point, Emily Maitlis was asking pertinent questions about the things that are only now sort of very widely being responded to by some of the institutions. And that's quite a time lag too.
And we're recording this episode of Newscast on Thursday evening. So this is the situation as we understand it, as we're talking about it now. Joe, you were breaking a little story earlier on that's related to this. I don't mean little as in not interesting, but just quite a bit, not quite on the same scale as what the royal family survived.
That's true.
But it was about Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson's company that he founded when he left politics.
Absolutely. The company is, and maybe was soon, called Global Counsel. It's a sort of PR and lobbying firm, and they're about to go into administration. They argue they're actually doing very well. They were growing. They had very good projections for the next year. They had a huge number of staff, but their association with Lord Mandelson, who founded the organisation, even though he's not been involved in it for a few months and is currently has no connection to it, they argue, it has led to them being in a position where it's just not sustainable to carry on. They've obviously had clients dumping them, and I suppose ultimately, if your job is to be a sort of advisor on reputation management, if your reputation is going down the Swanee because of your association with somebody as damaged as Lord Mandelson, maybe it is over. It's possible that I suppose people involved could start up a new company and something that doesn't have the sort of fingerprints of Lord Mandelson.
And the BBC's contacted Lord Mandelson several times to hear what he has to say about all of this. He's not got back to us, but our understanding is he says there was nothing in his actions that was criminal or to do with monetary gain. And I've just heard that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has left the police station where he was being questioned. So we'll see what the fallout from that is. Let's talk about somebody who entered a building today rather than leaving it. Who is Antonia Romeo and what's she going to be doing?
I always get a bit nervous when you ask me a question like that because I think this name you're going to throw at me now.
Mastermind, budget edition.
So Antonia Romeo is now the new Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary is effectively the most senior civil servant, and they sit alongside the Prime Minister and they are meant to effectively implement the government's policy agenda, get all the cogs working and get things happening. She is a woman, the first woman, it's worth noting, to hold that post in 110 years or something, ever.
110, yeah,
110 years.
1916.
I knew Joe would know the detail.
Winner of Celebrity Mastermind.
And what is interesting about this? Well, there are two things. The first thing is obviously the fact that Keir Starmer has had to find and appoint a new cabinet secretary at this point is because he got rid of his last cabinet secretary, who he'd not so long before that appointed, and which is a sign of the fact that he is almost acknowledging that his government is needing a sort of reshuffle or reset, call it what you will, to try and get things back on track. The other interesting thing about this appointment is that Antonia Romeo,
as in Anne Juliet.
as in Anne Juliet, she has been a senior figure in the civil service for some time. Since her name became put in the public frame as the front runner for this big important job in government, there has been an enormous kind of briefing and counter-briefing campaign playing out very publicly about her past record in senior roles, with lots of people disagreeing about whether or not she would be suitable for this appointment. And it's really quite extraordinary, the kind of extent that it's got to. It's based...
Because we don't normally get this about a behind-the-scenes person.
You just don't normally get this. And some people have asked why there is such scrutiny on this. I mean, is it because there is a lot of scrutiny at the moment on the appointments that Sir Keir Starmer is making? Because, of course, we know that other appointments, like the role of Peter Mandelson to US ambassador, have been widely questioned and questioned his judgment. Or is it because it's her specifically that's going to get this job? And really, really broadly, so people don't know, basically, there are some people that say, look, she's a go-getter that gets things done, that she shakes things up, that she's, implements stuff, that she's a great leader in the civil service. There are other people that point to particularly a time when she was working in New York as the UK's Consul General, when there were allegations made from several people about her conduct in that role, allegations around bullying. They were looked at ultimately by the Cabinet Office, and they said there was no case to answer, but they have resurfaced.
And that's several allegations that became one complaint.
That's exactly right.
Complaint, which was kind of knocked down by the officials who looked into it.
Exactly.
Luke, you in a previous life, you were a special advisor to a Conservative cabinet minister, and Antonia Romeo was in Whitehall at that point. Any memories you can bring to the table tonight?
Look, I didn't... No, I mean, at the time, she was in, I think, what is known as the Economic and Domestic Affairs Secretariat, which sounds like a very wonky title, but is actually a really important role. So she was leading that because that's the role that is responsible for sort of coordinating the Prime Minister's policy agenda. It's within the Cabinet Office. You negotiate between departments, things like write rounds where you're trying to get permission from other departments to do things, go through them. So it's quite a powerful role. And it's a role where essentially a lot of your job is about ungumming the government machine. And she didn't
Which is what the cabinet secretary is meant to do as well.
Exactly. So she's clearly got experience of that. As I say, I think I can only remember one meeting that I was in with her. I thought she was very impressive. But I think it is fair to say, I wonder how much of the resistance that is coming to her is because she isn't in the sort of mould of an old school civil servant. As like I said, people, that have worked with her do say, she is dynamic. She is, at the forefront of things. She's also, one of the things you notice about her is she has more of a public profile. Than lots of other civil servants. Has done more interviews, is known for that. And I just wonder...
She was in Vogue.
And I just wonder whether that sort of thing might have just put some of the more old school mandarins, you might call them, their noses out of joint slightly.
Well, it's interesting you say that because the kind of the big drama in this story was last week when Sir Simon MacDonald, who used to be the chief Foreign Secretary, the chief civil service at the Foreign Office, did an interview on Channel 4 News, really sticking the boot into her and the investigation that had been done into her background, and almost putting the boot into the Prime Minister as well for considering her. To me, it seems like, this is maybe the door closing on that sort of person's era now.
Perhaps. I think certainly, though, it is definitely a risk to have appointed her just because there are these allegations swirling around and there possibly could be more. But Keir Starmer is clearly wanting to spin the wheel again, is looking at the candidates and saying, I need somebody seemingly who is radical, who's going to shake things up, and I'm not going to listen to maybe these grumpy former colleagues. I think it's also worth pointing out that she's been appointed because he has changed his mind on the previous cabinet secretary. He's changed his mind a lot. Sue Gray, he changed his mind after 3 months as chief of staff. Morgan McSweeney, 16 months? Chris Wormald, the cabinet secretary, it was 14 months. So he does change his mind. Finally, I think it's worth pointing out too, Adam, that this is another example of the boys' club in Number 10 being disbanded. The first female cabinet secretary, we now have 2 acting female chiefs of staff, and we also have, who replaced a man as well, and a new acting director of communications, a woman who's replaced a man. So 4 women in sort of the top 3 roles, really, in which were 3 men a week and a half ago.
And let's be honest, no one is tuning into who's going to be the cabinet secretary like they're tuning in to see who's going to win Strictly or win in the Traitors. But it is an incredibly important job for the country. And what happens?
It's an incredibly important job for the country because, as we mentioned, it's sort of the role that's meant to get stuff done. And we know that Keir Starmer has publicly expressed his frustration at what he's described as pulling on a lever and then effectively not doing anything. Now, some people might say, well, it's your fault, you're the Prime Minister, it's your kind of job to make that happen. But then there is a question about the machinery of government and how you make that work effectively. And this job is meant to really do that. And if you ask the government what it thinks its answer to some of the problems, well-documented problems that it's facing is, they will say delivery. We have to deliver for people on what we said we would. And then we think that, people might start responding to us in a different way. And if you want to deliver things, you need to get the civil service and the Whitehall machine working, and this is effectively the role that's meant to do a bit of that.
Exactly. And although, again, I doubt many people are following the intricacies of this appointment. I've never had a cabinet secretary, I think, brought up in a focus group. It is exactly
Let's see what happens this weekend. Newscast.
But it is. It goes to the central problem of this government. So when, I ask people, what do you think about this government? They will often say, I just don't think they've done anything. They haven't brought about that change that was promised. And when you've got, again, people, whether it's Zach Polanski, Nigel Farage, increasingly Kemi Badenoch saying, we will do this. There seems to be much more politics of can outside of government than within it. And I see this appointment as trying to address that challenge from the public, which is we are going to deliver at all costs. And she might be a risk, but she's the person to do it.
But it is just also ever so briefly to just really hammer the point that Joe made. This isn't his first attempt at reshaping the team to try and get it working. There have been several iterations of all of these top people in government. And so far, none of that's really worked for him, and by his own acknowledgement, because he's having to do it again.
Just to go back to Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor leaving the police station, as we were having that conversation at about 7:30, the BBC's got a picture of him in the back of a car leaving the police station. And you guys can't see it because we're such a low-budget, low-tech studio, but I've got it on my laptop because someone's just sent it to me. And bear in mind, our job is interpreting images a lot of the time. That is the image.
Yes.
That's going to be...
Which is him lying back in the back seat, maybe trying to avoid the cameras.
Looking pretty kind of horrified. Not a great look for anyone to be in that position. And that obviously will be on the front pages of all the newspapers tomorrow and be quite a defining image, whatever happens next in this police investigation. Another story that I was working on this week. I mean, it wasn't really a story. It was just me having a chat with Robert Jenrick. But it was an interesting conversation because the day before he'd been appointed to what Reform UK called their shadow cabinet. And us pedants say to them every time, you're not really the shadow cabinet because only His Majesty's opposition get to call themselves the shadow cabinet. And then it's interesting because Reform then pushed back on that, saying, well, we're leading the polls, we're the ones calling the tune, so actually maybe you pedants need to start calling us the shadow cabinet.
It's part of their very deliberate strategy to try and portray themselves as a government in waiting. But you're right, the Conservatives are the official opposition.
Yes. So the Reform UK Treasury spokesperson, as we will call him, Robert Jenrick, was sat in this very studio on Wednesday. We had quite a long chat, and here is a little bit of it. And I wanted to play you the bit where the penny dropped for me, and then I'll tell you where the penny dropped and why.
Who suffers when there's a loss of credibility in the government and the country, when there's instability? Yeah, it's rich people in the city to some extent, but the people who suffer the most are working people, pensioners, people on lower incomes. And so if Reform aspires to be the voice for those people, it's got to provide stability. People have got to know that Reform will be careful with their money, that you can trust us with your pensions, your savings, your mortgage, your small business. And that was the message that I was trying to deliver today.
And then the penny that dropped was, I think Rachel Reeves, when she was Shadow Chancellor, was sat in this studio and said almost word for word, exactly the same message about fiscal responsibility and why you had to manage the government's budget and public spending and borrowing and taxation, because if you got it wrong, you harmed working people. It sounded like strangely familiar.
And that is the strategy, economic competence. They're trying to show they have more than just immigration policy in particular, and he's trying to be seen boring, talking about the OBR, talking about the Bank of England. From people I spoke to in his team and the wider reform team earlier in the week, they are very clearly trying to talk to the city, voters of course, but the city too. And I suppose putting together the shadow cabinet is, as Farage has admitted himself, about trying to get away from that perception, which he knows is amusing but also damaging, that his party's a one-man band.
But that's a very different look for reform from, say, when you were chasing them around the country as UKIP or the Brexit Party, isn't it?
Chasing in the most elegant fashion.
2015.
Journalistically chasing.
Yeah. Look, I think this is so interesting, and what happened this week with reform. So clearly, Nigel Farage has said they've been on this sort of pathway towards professionalisation and needing more experience and all the rest of it. And then this week, you had these two announcements. The Robert Jenrick was particularly interesting because I think it is a sort of an acknowledgement that one of the risks for reform is that people thought they would have played fast and loose with the public money, or they weren't economically credible, or they didn't have a proper plan for the public finances. And that's absolutely been the attack line from their political opponents, and put them in front of a journalist, and they'll quite often get asked the perfectly valid question, how are you going to pay for that? You know, they had to row back on some of their promised tax cuts that they'd initially said. You know, so they are now striking a very different tone under Robert Jenrick, very deliberately trying to say things like, you can trust us with your money, everything's going to be costed, you know, we are not going to be a risk, and not just to the markets, but I think to voters too. The risk, though, for reform in this strategy is twofold. The first one is that they are saying they're going to be a party of radical change, while now saying actually we're going to be very safe and secure, and echoing similar lines to predecessor parties, to the point that you made, Adam. And the other slight risk for reform, I think, here is that there are now points of difference, quite obviously, between Nigel Farage and Robert Jenrick. So,
for example, the two-child
benefit cap. So Nigel Farage, not so long ago, announced that hold on, I always get this the wrong way around.
I know, yeah, exactly. He says he would retain it being abolished.
Retain it being abolished. For some families, for what he calls British working families.
And Robert Jenrick says that now reform would reintroduce the two-child benefit
because he wants
cap
to be seen as responsible for public money, and we can't afford it. And the other one's the Office of Budget Responsibility, where just a couple of weeks ago, I think it was around Christmas time, Nigel Farage was sort of openly flirting with the notion of getting rid of the Office of Budget Responsibility. Now Robert Jenrick's come in and said, we're absolutely going to keep it. So there's sort of policy differences now happening at the top there. But also, I think, in the messaging from this party, if people are wanting a radical shake-up, and then you've got now the message that we're keeping these institutions and we're going to be quite solid, I just wonder how that kind of pitch sits.
Right, that's all we've got time for in this episode of Newscast. Luke, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joe, thanks to you too.
Thanks, Adam.
And Alex, great to see you as well.
Pleasure as ever.
And we'll be back with another episode of Newscast very soon. Bye-bye.